Call on Government Order of the Day number 10.
Medicines Amendment Bill, committee stage.
I declare the House in committee for consideration of the Medicines Amendment Bill. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Speaker.
He was keen though, wasn't he?
We got the bill. Right, members of the House and Committee on the Medicines Amendment Bill. The question is that Part 1 stand... a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Louise Upson.
I seek leave for the Medicines Amendment Bill to be taken as one debate.
Anyone opposed to that course of action? There is not. Leave is granted. So the question is that Parts 1 and 2 and the schedules and clauses 1 to 3 stand part.
Mr. Chairman, you can see that I am very eager to speak on the Medicines Amendment Bill because I've looked forward to this day for 6 years. 6 years I've looked forward to it. In fact, for 14 years, this bill has been in the making. In fact, this bill makes a few changes to the Medicines Act 1981. And it is an interim measure after 14 years. It's a bit of a sticking plaster, a bit of a patch-up, until the government progresses the Australian-New Zealand Therapeutic Products Agency under a treaty that was signed between Australia and New Zealand in 2003. So this is not a comprehensive overhaul of the Act, it is an interim measure. And the irony of this is, Mr. Chairman, that National, after years of political posturing and shilly-shallying in opposition, led by Tony Ryle, opposing a joint agency, finally have decided in 2011 that they now support it. That must be the biggest black backflip that we have seen on a piece of policy in this House. The Prime Minister agreed in 2011 that the National Government, who were once opposed to a joint agency, will now proceed with the establishment of the Australian-New Zealand Therapeutic Products Agency. And the legislation that will bring this agency into life sits on the order paper of this House, number 47 if you want to have a wee look. It's the very legislation that I introduced in 2007, unchanged after all the political posturing, now in the name of the Minister, Tony Ryle. Well, I have to say, 9 years in opposition with the most objectionable, obnoxious and full of cant and malicious fabrications about a joint agency, we now have a government in support of it. In fact, Mr Habe probably knows quite a lot about it because it was very much part of a trade deal we do with Australia under CER and the TTPA, and he is probably well aware of the negotiations that took place. But for purely political reasons, the National Party opposed the joint agency. So, Mr Speaker, this bill takes out some of the changes that were going to be made, a very narrow range of changes for an interim measure until the joint agency is set up. And I look forward to that day because as the Minister that took the heat on that bill and listened to so much rubbish over months and months, in fact years, I am delighted that the government finally saw the light. I have to give credit to the Prime Minister because there is no way that Tony Ryle would have seen the light. You see, a regulatory impact statement undertaken by NZIER right back in October 2000, 13 years ago, confirmed that the Medicines Act 1981, the Medicines Regulation 1984, the Dietary Supplements Regulations 1985 were outdated and gave rise to significant, quote, safety risks, trade barriers and costs to Crown and industry. And they proposed in 2000 the changes to be put in place should be around put in place regulations to make change and to put in place international best practice. Well, this bill that we're now finally hearing modernises the definition of medicine, medical devices and therapeutic products. Well, we welcome that, Mr Chairman, because it made up part of the negotiations for the joint agency all those years ago. The second thing it does, it changes the approval process for medicines and medical devices by the use of regulations to specify detail. Well, we support that, Mr Chairman, because it made up part of the changes that would have come in with the joint agency all those years ago. The third part of this bill amends the prescribing framework, as we will have three types of prescribers. Authorised prescribers are the ones that most people are familiar with. They're doctors, they're dentists, midwives, and they prescribe within a scope of practice that has been defined for them. Then we have designated prescribers, and they are a restricted subgroup, Mr Chairman.
Honourable Annette King.
They are a restricted subgroup of authorised prescribers currently as optometrists, nurse practitioners, and they've already got prescribing rights, and there's some specialised nurses also as designated prescribers. They're only allowed to prescribe medicines that are on a list, and that's listed in regulations. This bill revokes designated prescribed regs for nurse practitioners and for optometrists and names them now as authorised prescribers. So they now join the doctors, the dentists and the midwives. So it aligns them. And they too now will prescribe in line with their scope of practice. And they have shown, Mr Chairman, for 7 years they were totally capable of doing that. So it has taken rather a long time. The new category of prescribers is the delegated prescriber. Now, this new category is going to enable people to prescribe under a delegation and order by an authorised prescriber, that is a doctor or a dentist or a midwife, and in this case it will be a nurse practitioner or an optometrist. And in fact, the requirements will be at a lower level, and so they'll have limited prescribing, but we believe they will enhance the health workforce and also the ability to provide appropriate care within the community. Well, we support all those changes in this bill, Mr Chairman. The reason why, because they were a Labor proposal in government. It's only 5 years later that in fact we're now looking to pass them into law. So we certainly support those changes in this bill. But Mr Chairman, because this is taken as one debate, I have to emphasise again that we should learn a lesson from playing political games with major policy that affects the health of New Zealand, our trade obligations, and in fact the economic viability for many businesses in this country. And for purely political reasons, the joint agency with Australia was held up predominantly by the then opposition spokesperson Tony Ryle for no other reason than political purposes. Because now, all these years later, having opposed it, they're going to pass the very bill that I introduced, and the Prime Minister said they now support the joint agency. Can we not learn that there are some things that are for the good of this country and across the Parliament, instead of the sort of stupid political games that were played with this particular policy? So now, in an interim way, we'll make a few changes, a little bit of a sticking plaster, until the agency's in place, and I will celebrate that day, as I'm sure Honourable Christopher Pyne, who's now the Leader of the Parliament in the Australian Parliament, and Tony Abbott, who was the Minister of Health that helped negotiate it, now the Prime Minister of Australia, who gave so many concessions to New Zealand to ensure that we have an agency that is fair and equal and enabled us to act in a joint way and finally complete the negotiations that were the one part that was missing under CER. So, Mr Chairman, yes, we will support this bill, but the bigger picture needs to be the passage of the Therapeutic Products Bill, sitting on the order paper, date on it, introduced 2007.
Ian Lees-Galloway.